Welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about belief? I mean, is it something we're taught from scratch, or is it something we're kind of born with? Today, we're diving into that very question. We're going to go on a journey, starting with what's inside us, then looking at the wide world out there, and finally wrestling with some pretty deep philosophical ideas. So, let's get started. So, our journey really kicks off with this big question. The idea we're exploring today suggests that belief isn't so much about learning something new, but more about awakening something that's already there, deep inside us. And this whole concept is wrapped up in one single, powerful word: fitra. So what exactly is fitrat? Well, think of it as the true default setting of a thing when nothing is interfering with it. For us humans, the source says this default setting is a natural pull towards God. It's almost like we have a built-in compass that's always pointing towards the divine. Now sure, other forces can mess with the signal, but that original inclination, it's always there. And you know, this idea of an innate belief, it's not new at all. The ancient writer Plutarch pointed out something fascinating. He said you might find cities without walls, without laws, even without literature, but you will never, ever find a city where people don't have some sense of the divine. It kind of suggests that this belief in a higher power is just a fundamental part of being human. This story really brings that point home. There was this scholar, right, named Dewani, and he was all set to write this big, important book to prove God's existence. But when his maidservant heard about his plan, she just looked at him and quoted the Qur'an, asking, "Is there any doubt about Allah?" And that simple, powerful question just hit him. He was so struck by how obvious the answer was that he just abandoned the whole project. It just goes to show, for a lot of people, belief is so intuitive it doesn't really need a complicated proof. All right, so we've looked inward at this idea of an innate belief. Now let's flip the script and turn our attention outward. Let's look for signs of the divine in the world all around us. Imam Ali puts forward this incredibly simple, yet really profound argument. He says, look, if a footprint in the sand points to a person, what does this massive, intricate universe point to? The logic is just so clear. A grand design implies a grand designer. And this beautiful little analogy from the source makes the exact same point. There's a story of an old woman who was asked how she knew God existed. She just pointed to her spinning wheel. It only turns, she said, when she turns it. So how, she wondered, could this entire universe run so perfectly without someone in charge? It's just a simple observation, but man, it has some profound implications. And get this simple, direct reasoning was so powerful that the Prophet himself actually praised it. He encouraged his followers to adopt that same kind of common sense approach. It's a huge reminder that faith can be built on what we see every day, not just on complex theology. And here's another thing to chew on. Think about it. You have the same soil, the same water, the same sun, and yet from that same source, you get this incredible variety of fruits, each with its own unique flavor, its own unique texture. How is that even possible without some kind of intelligent designer behind it all? This question kind of leads us down a more philosophical path. Okay, so we've looked inward at our own nature, and we've looked outward at the world around us. Now, let's get a little more abstract and explore a purely philosophical argument for a self-sufficient, necessary being. Let's try to break this down logically. How did everything get here? Well, the source walks us through the options. First, things can't create themselves, right? That's a total paradox. And they can't just pop out of absolute nothingness. So that leaves a chain, where one thing is created by another thing, which was created by another thing, and so on. But think about that chain. Can it just go back forever and ever? If it did, there'd be no original spark, no first push to get the whole thing started. It's like a train with an infinite number of cars, but no engine. It's not going anywhere. So logically, that chain has to have a beginning, a first cause, a being that wasn't created, but just is. And this first cause, this engine for the cosmic train, has a name: Wajh al-Wujood, or the necessary being. It's not just some abstract idea. It's a being whose very existence is essential for everything else to even be here. The entire universe is hanging on this one single necessary reality. And you know, this philosophical idea lines up perfectly with a verse in the Qur'an. It describes us, humanity, as being in need, while God is completely self-sufficient, free of any need. This contrast is key, and it actually sets us up perfectly for our next point. Okay, so we've laid out the arguments for a creator. But what about the other side of the coin? What about the arguments against one? The source frames this as a fundamental choice between two very, very different ways of seeing the entire universe. At the heart of this whole debate, you've really got two opposing views. On one side, you see a universe filled with order, organization, and a clear plan, which points to a wise creator. On the other side, you see a universe born from chaos and pure chance, with no guiding intelligence anywhere to be found. Now, one of the specific arguments the source tackles comes from the theory of evolution. The argument goes something like this. When we see redundant or leftover body parts in animals, it suggests they weren't perfectly designed from scratch. Instead, it implies they evolved from earlier forms, kind of carrying along old baggage. To respond to this, the source offers a really compelling story. So here's the parable. Imagine two people are visiting this absolutely magnificent palace. As they're exploring, they come across one strange room that they just don't understand the purpose of. The first person assumes, well, the wise builder must have had a reason for this, even if I can't see it. But the second person declares, because I can't understand this one room, the whole palace must be a fluke. It must have built itself by pure chance. You see, the story really highlights two completely different mindsets. One that looks for purpose, even in mystery, and another that just defaults to randomness when faced with something it doesn't understand. We've considered our inner feelings, we've looked at external evidence, and we've dived into some heavy philosophy. Now we come to the final point in our journey, and this one is less about absolute proof and more about making a practical, rational choice. Think of it like a cost-benefit analysis. Let's weigh the possibilities. Scenario 1, there is no God. In that case, after we die, it doesn't matter what anyone believed. Believer, non-believer, we all end up in the same state of nothingness. No harm, no foul. But what if scenario 2 is true? What if there is a God? Well, then the outcomes are drastically different. The believer is saved, but the non-believer faces some serious consequences. So, when you look at the stakes, the source argues that belief is simply the most logical and prudent choice. It's a kind of rational risk management. If you're wrong, you lose nothing. But if you're right, you gain everything. And this very line of reasoning, well, it's had a profound impact on people. And this isn't just a thought experiment, it's a powerful testimony. A former atheist talks about how his entire life was turned upside down when he read about an exchange where Imam Jafar as-Sadiq posed this exact scenario to someone. The man was suddenly struck by this simple, jolting thought. What if the Imam is right? He said the question literally took the pleasure of sleep from his eyes, as he just laid there contemplating the future that might be waiting for him if he was wrong. It was that single, prudent calculation that changed his whole worldview. And so, our journey ends here, with a final question that's really just for you to think about. We've explored the arguments from our own nature, from the world around us, and from the realm of pure logic. All these signs have been presented. So now, the choice is yours. Which path seems more prudent to you?